Welcome to today's webinar, Behind Kentucky's Progress, Closing the High School Graduation Gap for Low-Income Students. I'm Rachel Tutwiler-Fortune, Director of Alliance Engagement at America's Promise Alliance. As Kentucky achieved the highest graduation rate for low-income students and the smallest graduation rate gap between low-income and non-low-income students in the United States in 2013, this Grad Nation webinar will delve more deeply into the state's progress. I'm pleased to be joined today by my colleague Jennifer DePaoli, Senior Education Advisor at Civic Enterprises, and Joanna Fox, Senior Policy Analyst at the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University, two of the three authors of the recently released report for all kids, How Kentucky is Closing the High School Graduation Gap for Low-Income Students. Also joining us are two dynamic leaders from the state of Kentucky. Christina Weeder, Director of Student Success for the Kentucky Department of Education, and Corey Curl, Associate Executive Director at the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence. Representatives of two organizations consulted during the research process, whose efforts have also greatly contributed to the state's progress. In a few minutes, I will turn it over to Christina to provide a few opening remarks. And after we hear from her, Jen and Joanna will provide a research briefing. After their presentation, we will transition to a Q&A panel where Corey will join Christina, Jen, and Joanna to answer attendee questions about Kentucky's progress. Christina, would you like to provide a few opening remarks?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'd just like to say that closing the graduation gap for low-income students is really important because we see education as a pathway out of poverty and will really help build a strong economy here in Kentucky. This is especially important with the decline of key industries that have provided jobs here in the past. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit too about how we became involved in this research. After the Grad Nation report came out with data on Kentucky's high graduation rates overall, and particularly for low-income students, Joanna Fox reached out to us to discuss some of what may have contributed to those positive outcomes. And so we met to discuss some of the state-level work that was hopefully contributing to the success, and some of these things that we discussed are included in the For All Kids report. We're really excited that the researchers are shining a light on the important work that's underway here in Kentucky. We have some efforts supported at the state level that you might see in other states supported at the school or the district level, but the fact that Kentucky supports some of these at the state level is something that we think other states could potentially replicate. A few examples of this would be the Friskies, as we call them here locally, which stands for the Family Resource and Youth Service Centers. And these are charged with addressing the non-academic barriers to success in school and are located in schools that have the highest free and reduced lunch rates. So definitely helping to support low-income students in those schools. Some other work that we have been doing or implementing since the initial report came out is our novice reduction work, which provides training, coaching, resources, and tools to assist schools and districts to reduce the number of students scoring at the novice level and overall improve student achievement. We also have some early warning tools that are built into the statewide student information system that every school can use to identify students at risk of school failure and or becoming off track to graduate. And these tools can then be used to implement and track interventions tailored to those students that are identified. We also implemented policy to increase the compulsory education age from 16 to 18. But what's I think really key here is that we also paired that with supports for implementation of that, so that it wasn't just changing a policy without also providing some support for the implementation of that policy. Part of that included planning grants to districts for how they would implement the policy. And then we've also implemented a number of other supports for dropout prevention and re-engagement that we refer to as our Persistence to Graduation initiatives. And these include a listserv for sharing resources and learning opportunities, hosting webinars featuring successful practices in Kentucky schools. And this past summer, we had our first Persistence to Graduation Summit with sessions that featured best practices from schools and districts across the state. And all of this is really to support peer-to-peer learning throughout schools and districts in Kentucky. Finally, I'd like to add that it's also important for Kentuckians to know how well we compare to other states and to be proud of that. I sometimes hear how, Kentucky's at the bottom of all the lists, but really they don't recognize that in education we're doing pretty well in comparison to some of our peers. So it's important, I think, for us as a state to recognize that, and certainly recognition, but from groups like America's Promise Alliance, help build awareness of what's working in our state. So thank you again for the opportunity to participate today.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you for your incredible leadership at the Kentucky Department of Education. I'll now turn it over to Jen to begin our research briefing.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start off by saying, you can see on your screen right now, we have where does Kentucky stand? Kentucky's high school graduation rate currently ranks 9th in the nation at 87.5%, and that was from 2014, which is the last year that federally reported graduation rate data was released. And I just want to say before we get into the data that there are two reasons why we use federally reported data. One, although it's not perfect, the federally reported adjusted cohort graduation rate, or ACGR, is as close to a gold standard we have in terms of graduation rate reporting, meaning that every state is expected to meet the same requirements when they're reporting their graduation rate data. And that leads me to the second reason, which is because every state is expected to follow the same guidelines when reporting their graduation rate data federally, it allows for a level of state-to-state comparison that if we were just looking at state-level data would not help us to see. So just keep that in mind. I also want to say, especially for those of you who might be on here from the state of Kentucky, which thank you if you are, some of the numbers you see might be slightly different from what you're seeing reported in the state. One of the reasons is, like I said, is simply because that's state level data, whereas we're using federal data. But the other reason, especially in a state like Kentucky, where so many districts are actually very small, we have issues with what the Federal Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. And what it is a federal law that protects the privacy of student education records. So in compliance with FERPA, when the Federal Department of Education releases ACGR data, it applies a combination of disclosure avoidance techniques, including suppressing data for very small groups. So, when we're reporting on low-income students specifically, there may only be 10 or 15 of them in a school, and so therefore the federal government wants to make sure that student data is kept private. So they often report that data in ranges. Some of those ranges are very, very small, so when we estimate that estimate is very close to accurate. Some of those ranges are a little bit larger, so we do the best we can in terms of reporting an estimate that is true to the graduation rate as possible. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. But we this is what we use. I'm seeing some things going on my webinar screen, so I'm trying to figure out how to change the screen here. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So as you can see in Kentucky, this is a great graph that shows how high school graduation rates have changed over time. So the blue line that you're seeing is the AFGR, the average freshman graduation rate, which is what used to be used to report graduation rates and still is used in a lot of cases. The federal government has gotten away from reporting it in a timely fashion, but we still have it out there, and it gives us a great view going back in time. So you can see Kentucky started off very low in the low 70s, worked their way up, and then had a little bit of a dip in 2008, but then it's been rising ever since. Kentucky is one of the few states that actually didn't report ACGR, as you can see, until 2013. Most other states started reporting in 2011, but because Kentucky was granted a waiver, we only have 2 years of ACGR data for the state. So in 2013, when the state first started reporting, the graduation rate was 86.1%, and then worked its way up, like I said, to 87.5% in 2014. So excellent progress being made over time, which feeds into one of the main findings of our report, is that in Kentucky, slow and steady wins the race was really a big factor in how that graduation rate was raised. And then, looking at the state map, and this is something that we report in our Building a Grad Nation report every year, is being able to see these high school graduation rates across the nation. And as you can see, Kentucky is amongst the highest, amongst the highest graduation rate in the nation. Our goal at the Grad Nation campaign is to reach a 90% graduation rate by 2020. Kentucky is well on their way to meeting that goal. And you can see the great variation across states. Most states now are above 70% or above, which is still lagging in a lot of ways. But especially given Kentucky's status, like Christina was saying, that Kentucky seems to be on the lower end of things that people see across the nation. And really, when you look at their education system and the way they're graduating students, they're really near the top, which is really one of the reasons why we wanted to go to Kentucky to see what was going on there. So I wanted to start by saying all the really good positive news, and there is more to come. But I want to talk a little bit about how some groups of students are faring in Kentucky versus others. So you can look here and see some of these selected high school graduation gaps. The one that that Rachel mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is the difference between low-income students and non-low-income students. So like I was saying, in 2013, when Kentucky first reported the ACGR, and we were actually able to see what their low-income student rate was at the state level, the graduation gap between those two groups was less than 2%. Which is really astounding given that the national average is about 15 percentage point gap. Last year in 2014, that gap was 7 points, which obviously we don't want to see that keep tracking in a negative direction, but still places them second in the nation behind Indiana in terms of that graduation rate gap. For other groups, though, it's not quite as positive. You can see the grad rate gap between Black students and white students is about 10 percentage points, and I'll talk a little bit more about where these students are in a second. You can see ELL students versus non-ELL, 22. That's pretty close to what the average is in the nation. Actually, I think the national average is still a little bit higher than that. And then special education students and non-special education students, an 18-point gap. So that's still an area that needs tremendous improvement. So we hope that Kentucky is putting effort in on that front to make sure that those gaps with these other students, as much as we're impressed with the non-low-income, low-income gap, we need to make sure that all of these different types of students are getting to that graduation line. So looking at some of the school district data that we pulled, you can first see this map of Kentucky with all of their counties and all of their school districts and see where the grad rate ranges are. So as you can see, it's really pretty positive across the state. Most of the states are that light yellow color, so they're in that 90 to 100% grad rate range. You only really have a very few states, or a few counties, excuse me, that are in that 70 to 79 range, and you don't have any that are below that. This is not common across other states. So for Kentucky to be, having this wide a spread of success across the state is really something, and is leading to why they have such a high statewide graduation rate. And one of the things that we started focusing on in building a grad nation this year, and you know, we can take a look at it for Kentucky, is where are the non-graduates coming from? So when we say non-graduates, we mean where are the students located that are not graduating in 4 years. That doesn't mean that they are not graduating. It just simply means that they're not graduating in that 4-year time period. And so looking at Kentucky's data, you can see that these are the top 15 districts with the highest percentage of non-grads. And I just want to say this with a caveat, because it looks like Jefferson County is far and away producing the most non-grads, but it's also the largest district in the state by quite a few students. And so when you have 27, 28% of the non-grads coming from the state, it looks weighted, it looks heavily skewed against them, but it really isn't. You know, they do have quite a few non-grads, and they do have one of the lowest grad rates across the state. So obviously work needs to be done in Jefferson County to make sure more of these kids are their diplomas in 4 years. But it's not it's not as heavily skewed as it looks. So you can look and see Fayette County is the second largest district in the state. So they also have a significant number of non-grads. But you can see some of the numbers that we're dealing with, and I think that's really what's important here. When you look at this column with non-grads in the district, you can see that some of these you know, counties, it's really not a ton of students. It's not like we're dealing with, you know, thousands and thousands of students. We're dealing with numbers that are you know, it's possible to get those kids to graduation. We just need to figure out how. So moving on. Sometimes this wants to work and sometimes it doesn't. Thank you. So looking at the types of high schools where these non-graduates are attending, you can see that the majority of them are attending what we would consider to be regular high schools. There's 73% are coming from your typical comprehensive high school. What is worrisome and what this slide doesn't show is looking at these alternative schools. While it says 26% are coming from the school, what we reported in this year's Building a Grad Nation report is that 100% of Kentucky's alternative schools were considered to be low graduation rate high schools. Or to put it in other terms, are schools that have 100 or more students and are graduating 67% or less of them. Now, granted, alternative schools are dealing with a very challenging student population. That needs to be kept in mind. Many of them come in off track. And while they may not graduate in 4 years, they may graduate in 5 or 6. But just to keep in mind, we need to make sure that those schools are actually graduating them at some point, and not just a place where students can get pushed off the books of regular high schools. And this is the last slide that I have before I will pass it off to Joanna to talk more about the main findings of our report. But this is a really interesting map that I think shows really clearly where these low graduation rate high schools are, which really has become our focus here. You know, where are these schools producing a lot of non-grads? Where are these schools that are just continuously not graduating the numbers of students that they should? And you can see, one, they tend to be heavily in the Louisville, Jefferson County area, and you also see a few in this Lexington area, and then up into northern Kentucky, a little bit more dispersed into western Kentucky, central, and a few over here in the east and south. But the majority of them are these alternative schools I was just talking about. You only see 1 or 2 pins there for regular schools, meaning those comprehensive high schools. And so once again, it's really imperative that as Kentucky moves forward, that they focus on making sure those alternative schools are actually places where students are getting the education they need, and that they are graduating eventually and getting the diploma and are ready to move on successfully. And with that, like I said, I will pass it over to Joanna, who can tell a little bit more about our report's findings.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. It's good to hear your introduction and the focus on schools and districts. And I wanted to let you all know that briefly I'm going to zip through some of our key findings that we learned. We talked, as Christina mentioned, with the State Department. We visited schools and districts, both in rural areas and Jefferson County and north of there in Covington. And throughout our visits, we were absolutely impressed by the fact that Kentucky had built a will and a culture of educational change. And this is what folks had told us in the beginning. But after visiting all these places, we believed it. Not everything's perfect, but let me just share a couple things. Slow and consistent. It's been going on for 30 years, basically. We'll get back into that in a minute. There is a very diverse coalition of supporters who's kept things moving. They're focused on students. They've been using data all along since the late 1990s, when the lens we now put on data was not customary everywhere. And they, excuse me, have some unique aspects, and I'm using federal grants wisely, and I don't mean to imply that other people, other states don't. It's that there's a very nice way they've jigsawed things together. They don't have charter schools, and we think this may be important because it does not give options for people to opt out of the regular public education system. Local control, this is something people talk about a great deal, but it was actualized in Kentucky. Accelerated education options, yeah. How can, especially as the students become, or the school becomes 18, that really takes some attention. And last of all, Kentucky was uniquely challenged in many ways by the fact that the coal industry just collapsed. And I would like to move on to the next slide, and let's see if we can do it. Folks, here we go. What we do know, and Jen touched on it quickly, so I won't go over it at length. It's a very rural state. There are only a few urban districts, unlike many, although they're large, and so they do disproportionately influence graduation. Low-income students are found everywhere, but not entirely. So there are some high-income districts. When you have that, it takes some balancing act. Surprisingly to us, and very appealingly, because this is breaking a national trend, we could not find a quantitative relationship between the percentage of low-income students served in a district and the graduation rates. And that's something we'd really like to look into more. It's quite important if Kentucky can break that linear relationship between income and achievement. We do know that Kentucky had lower income and achievement gaps than in neighboring states with relatively similar populations. That's why it stood out to us, because it means what are they doing that's making things work. Similarly, there are better or lower gaps than in many rural states, and rural states have special challenges of distances and populations and transportation and inability often to offer advanced courses. So this was very encouraging as well. What locally, as we interviewed in the schools and districts that we visited, what were the success factors? Basically, people were paying attention to education basics, but in an organized way. They wanted to make sure that all students had access to a high-quality curriculum and instruction, in-school support systems. Christina Weeder mentioned the youth centers, but there were many, many more in the districts we visited. Assessments and accountabilities for student outcomes. What was interesting there was that people did not resent student accountability. It has been in Kentucky for so long, since the 1990s. It was taken as a way of life. And we found that repeatedly in conversations with teachers. Just taking for granted that you're responsible for your kids and how they're doing, all across the board. Looking at data was a key in everybody's mind. We saw, lots of data charts up on walls, and lots of data meetings and so forth. And the schools had strong leadership and community backing. Where did it start? When we say steady and determined wins the race, well, there was an equity lawsuit brought by 66 superintendents in the late 1990s, and it resulted in the Kentucky Supreme Court making a decision that the funding for the state districts was inequitable and had to be changed. And a coalition of people was waiting in the background, had really drafted legislation, and lo and behold, the Kentucky Education Reform Act, or KERA, was passed in 1993, which is really somewhat quite lightning speed in terms of state movement, and that's something to be credited. As part of that, you had a development of standards and accountability. You created a commissioner of education and a board of elementary and secondary education. And that group was enabled to go into schools and assist them. And again, we talked with one low-performing school that had turned around, and my goodness, they welcomed the fact that the state folks had come in, a team of them, and worked with them to help them understand how better to teach the state curriculum, how to teach different kinds of students with differentiated instruction. And so when one talks about technical assistance, it was positive and supportive, and it was also demanding. A key feature in Kentucky is site-based decision-making councils at each school. 3 teachers, 3 parents, if I remember right, and the principal. Now, what's interesting about that to us is that many, many states have said we'll have a local school control team or a local school support team. That's what they're called in Washington, D.C. It's become a somewhat standard element, but it wasn't in terms of use. And what we found in Kentucky was the site-based decision-makings have power and authority over hiring and teachers, and that is unusual. So it's also a key. There was more power given to the superintendents and also to the site-based councils. There'd been a problem in a rural area, a large rural area, if you look at the state map, cronyism and friends and families controlling things. And if you're going to move forward, sometimes that needs to be broken up. Last, we found that there was unique attention paid K-3, especially in literacy, that students were grouped by their needs rather than their age level or grade level. This allowed teachers to really teach to the needs of the student. And as one of our correspondents recently pointed out, Kentucky has had a strong rise in its literacy rates that this gentleman thought contributed substantially to improved graduation rates. There's no way to really show that causally, but it's something in the background. Now, quick segueing to why did it all work so fast back in the 1990s? Well, 3 leading CEOs came on very strong, and they were insistent that they were going to see it work. The Pritchard Committee was formed. It went through a few early different configurations, but it's a nonprofit, non-governmental education group that's been there ever since. And it holds the state's feet to the fire in a nice way. Constantly and carefully, they had a wonderful blog this morning about the importance of student voice in the site-based decision councils. But they are actively promoting good legislation and advocating for it very thoroughly. Last of all, we have local coalitions and advocates who are there on the side really pushing for student success. We found the same in Berea College in eastern Kentucky, where there are many districts that it works with. I think it was close to 30 in different ways. and this is one of the most impoverished area of Kentucky, to bring federal grants in and to then help them implement them. And statewide Kentucky Superintendents Association, the list goes on, but the supporters are there and they stay there and they're involved. Okay, whoops, let me see here, go back a minute. Data. I mentioned data, and I'll just mention it briefly. Again, it's been the buzzword for many, many people, but early on, they instituted the CURIS. It's been modified several times since, many times since, and federal grants in the state longitudinal data system, as I'm sure they have done for many of the listeners, they brought in extra funding to help expand databases, to help refine them, to do them across K-12 to P-20. Now Kentucky has introduced its Center for Education and Workforce Statistics, and so people can begin to track what are the successes of students as they go through the system and what can be learned about looking at longitudinal data about what are the characteristics that make students more successful and less successful, and you can look at institutional characteristics. There's easy access now for parents and the public to see student data. There's a data dashboard, all of the buzzwords, but they're up there and in front of people so they can consider what can we do better. And then we've got, they do now report the adjusted cohort graduation rate. As Jen said, a little bit late compared to the other states, but that was really as they got their whole previous databases organized. Kentucky is one of the few states that reports 5-year rates, and that does give people time to bring kids up to speed, and some kids definitely need that extra time. And we know it gives schools and districts at least a 3-year bump up in their graduation rate. Some districts it gives more. Last of all, they had a specific program for dropout intervention. It had multiple points. Christina mentioned it just briefly, and I would say it's got enough points that I think you should go look at the report to see it, because it was a very well thought out program that from the early days looked at mentoring and tutoring and advising. It was student-centered, had the student resource centers, alternative education. So many options that could be done together. And when they're done together is when they're done best. Here we go. Quick summarizing them, I'd say a few more that I didn't mention were the parent involvement services, work-related service opportunities, student-centered services, and tutoring by adults and peers. We all know that what we've learned in school improvement, just to segue a little bit, is that if we can support students in a multiple of options and ways, we can have many more students graduate. And they need that success, and they need that support, especially if they're in a family that is not working too well, and they can't always get it from family members. Okay, unique aspects, just to quick summarize the creative and wise use of federal grants. I mentioned before, but it starts, there were simple things, not simple things rather, but you don't think of them as associated with education. They built a big road system in eastern Kentucky. Why is that important? People can get out and people can get in. Students are not so isolated. Those were big Appalachian initiatives. And we could see the difference because we visited a couple of districts with tiny little windy roads that are impassable in winter snow, and the kids missed 25 or 30 days. We visited other districts where the district is close to the main highway, and they're beautiful highways, much less isolated. If we want to give kids exposure to college and careers, we've got to give them a way to get those places. Other people have also pointed out that Kentucky has its community colleges are spread quite thinly. Well, you've got to be able to get out. If you want kids to know what's ahead of them, they need to be able to see it. And the grants we mentioned at Berea College, shifting gears, that are educational grants, the Gear Up and Trio grants, well, those take middle school kids and help move them on up all the way with support, so with the focus of college and career. Lack of charters, we mentioned, it's a bit of a contentious subject, but we still think it's a key one. Local control and the accelerated options, advanced placement, dual enrollment, early college, high schools, and college exposure trips are increasingly becoming important. So with that, I would like to summarize and say we hope you will take all these wonderful lessons from Kentucky. And the key point is they've done all these things together, not alone, not singly, and they've kept it all moving. There's civic will, there's political will to improve the educational system, and there's a deep commitment to doing that. And with that, let me turn this over to Rachel, who I believe is going to lead the question and answer session.
Yes, thank you so much, Joanna, and thanks to both you and Jen for that very helpful research briefing. If you haven't already, I'd like to encourage all attendees to use the questions pane to submit your questions at this time. And while we're waiting, I'd like to just share a little bit about what's been happening with Grad Nation this year. In partnership with AT&T, we've been working to convene 39 additional Grad Nation community summits, bringing us closer to the goal of 100 summits convened across the nation. This year, we've also advanced the Grad Nation State Activation Initiative, a collaboration between America's Promise Alliance and Pearson to boost state graduation rates, invest in innovative state efforts, and to build a nationwide learning community so that we can all learn from each other. And for the learning community's benefit, we will continue to provide virtual and other types of learning opportunities. So we welcome all state and community leaders doing work to improve graduation rates to join us. And if you'd like to join the learning community, please indicate your interest on the short survey that will follow this webinar. As we transition to the Q&A portion, I would like to welcome Coy Curl from the Pritchard Committee as she joins Christina Weeder, Jennifer DePaoli, and Joanna Fox. I'll kick off the Q&A portion of this webinar with the following question. Since there are no standard graduation requirements across states, should or shouldn't stakeholders from other states seriously consider what Kentucky did to raise the high school graduation rate for all students while narrowing the graduation gap for students from low-income families?
I can go ahead and start this off. So my answer is yes. Other states should be looking at Kentucky. First of all, I'll say, when you're looking at anything state to state, there are going to be differences. I think we're all well aware of that. No two states are the same. But when we're talking about graduation requirements versus, where we more commonly talk about are the standards high enough, standards are different than a typical graduation requirement, and we do need to make sure that all states are meeting similarly high standards. But when it comes to meeting graduation requirements, which often entails meetings certain what's the word I'm looking for, curriculum requirements, course requirements. Kentucky is they're right up there, and they're doing fine with in terms of making sure students are required to meet so many courses, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, I think, and even when you're looking beyond graduation rates, You know, Kentucky's doing some really interesting things, and I think it's really important. And number one, and I know Corey's on here, so if she wants to speak to this, and I know Joanna mentioned it, but you know, the Pritchard Committee is something that you just don't really see in other states, and that's really getting a view of parents and students and you know, outside stakeholders that really have a positive influence on the education system. So some of those best practices, regardless of when you're talking about graduation requirements and differences across states, are still things that are really important to pay attention to. And you know, I think it's absolutely a good model that other states should look at.
Thanks, Jen. Very helpful. Did anyone of the other panelists want to weigh in on that question?
Well, this is Joanna. I think I'd just weigh in briefly that as an example of how Kentucky keeps things going long and steady, slow and steady. There was a movement last year to relook at how at their accountability system and their assessment system, and it will probably come up again this year. It was last done probably about 8 years ago. But when you look at standards, yes, people are looking, how do we raise them? How do we deepen them? How do we know whether we're doing things better or not? And that's what this new legislation was going to call for, and I expect it will come up again. And I think Corey might really want to pop in a little bit.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. This is Corey from the Pritchard Committee. And yes, I would definitely agree. We are so proud of the results that we're getting when we look at our high school graduation rates. And we do have some of the more rigorous, I believe, graduation requirements in terms of coursework, including 3 years of math through Algebra 2 and an additional year of math on top of that. And so that is such a testament to the leadership that we've enjoyed at the state level, which is so focused and is focused still today on ensuring not only that every student graduates, but they do so with a clear plan and the preparation that they need for their next steps. So while we are so proud of the results that we have today, we know there's so much more to be done to make sure that every single child graduates with that preparation that they need. So for us as an organization of citizens, so much of our work is to make sure that the correct information is out there, that parents do have the information about how students are performing through their educational journeys, and that folks are empowered to ask good questions and hard questions, and keep pressing, keep the demand up for all of the good work and the changes that need to happen so that every child can be successful. So I think that's a really important message for us. There was tremendous momentum in the 1980s and 90s, and we feel that that level of momentum needs to be there still today, as the requirements and the real need for education as a path to opportunity becomes ever greater in our economy within the state of Kentucky and much more broadly across the nation and the world.
Wonderful. Thanks, Corey. And Corey, I actually think this next question might be a good one for you as well. Philip Cummings is wondering if you can give us examples of parental involvement and accountability and how that looks in the state of Kentucky.
Sure, absolutely. So there are several ways that parents are intentionally involved in the education system, and we are always doing as much as we can to make sure that parents have the tools at their at their disposal to understand the data and to ask good questions based on the data. Some of the reforms that Joanna discussed going back to the early 90s really gave parents a greater voice in school level decision making. So parents actually sit on school councils all across the state and have a great deal of influence over the priorities and practices within schools. So making sure that parents have a strong understanding of the education system is a real priority for us and for many of our wonderful partners across the state. We, as an organization, work with a number of other partners to hold a Parent Leadership Institute that has been ongoing since 1997. So we have actually had 2,400 parents graduate from that program, where they really go in depth into the state's education system and the accountability system and really dive deep into school data. And then each of those parents is charged with involving a number of other parents into their work to improve student achievement and student performance more broadly across the state. So I think those are some ways that parents have been involved. And then, of course, today, as Kentucky, along with many other states, are taking another look at their accountability systems due to the Every Student Succeeds Act, it is imperative to us that parents are a big piece of that process, so that ultimately, at the end of the day, it's an accountability system that they believe in and that they can derive actionable information from, and that they can explain in their own communities.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Corey. Very helpful, and very helpful to have the Pritchard Committee's perspective as a part of this conversation. So we have a question that came in from Karen Wright. She's wondering, with the unique aspects, that part of the presentation, actually the slide that's still before us, what were we speaking of when we talked about local control? So perhaps one of the presenters could just give us a little bit more about local control and what that specifically looks like in Kentucky.
Hi, this is Joanna. We've covered it in many ways. It's really the site-based decision-making councils that are parents and teachers who make decisions for the school. It's required in legislation. It's not voluntary. And although there are other ways local control is often manifested, here it's really taken down to the ground level, and combined with the kind of parent input that Corey just mentioned and the parent training, it's an extremely important part. People often complain that states tell schools what to do or districts tell schools what to do. Well, some of that happens, but especially when you have very small districts, very small schools. I think the smallest high school in Kentucky that we found had 20 kids graduating in the senior class, but there were many, many others that were 50 and 60. The school is very close to the community, and having parents have that voice and work with teachers, not fussing at them, but people are working together, can be a very key item in setting the future of a school and constantly monitoring it. And of course, in that situation, you're getting lots of input from students and your community members. And so the school goes back to being what schools used to be, which is a very, very intimate part of the community. Who else would like to take a little bit of that question?
And I know we have just a few more minutes here, so we had a couple more questions that came in. See if we can get to one or two more of them. Perhaps this is a good one for you, Christina. Leslie Greenwich on the line was wondering if someone could talk a bit about tests that Kentucky students have to pass to graduate. So specifically, she's wondering whether Kentucky has a test that student must pass to graduate, um, whether it's ELA, mathematics, or any other subject areas.
Well, that's actually something that would be best answered by our someone in our Office of Assessment Accountability, but I can try to speak to it as best that I can, because that's not something that my division specifically focuses on. But students do have end-of-course exams that they have to complete, and there are a variety of other requirements for graduation that assess both college and career readiness, and all that information is detailed on our website. But you know, so there's some basic state assessments that but that are basically required for the different grade levels.
Wonderful, thanks, Christina, and definitely would echo that it would be really great for participants to take a look at Kentucky Department of Education's website to learn some of the specifics about the state assessment system. So we'll make this one the last one. An anonymous question came in, but it's a great one. How are students selected for the student voice team? How many are on the team from around the state? And what impact have the students made? We'll make that our final question. Does one of our panelists, feel equipped to answer that question?
Sure, this is Corey from the Pritchard Committee. I'm assuming that that question is in reference to the student voice team that falls under the Pritchard Committee umbrella. The student voice team is a self-selected in terms of, as students are interested and they find out about it, they join that group. And those students are very active in learning about the education system and studying the issues. There have been a few issues where they've decided to take a real advocacy perspective and push for specific legislation or budget items. They were very successful in our last budget session in securing some additional dollars for post-secondary scholarships through our lottery. And you can find much more about them online. They are very, very present online.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Corey, and thanks to the attendee who raised that question. We at America's Promise Alliance also agree that youth leadership and perspective is an important part of this important work to close gaps and make sure all young people are set up for success. So that's all the time we have today. For more information about the Grad Nation campaign and to access the full For All Kids report, I want to encourage you all to visit gradnation.org. And to join the conversation on social media, please use the hashtag GradNation. Thanks so much for joining us, and please take a few minutes to answer the questions in the short survey that follows. Have a great afternoon, everyone.